She found the marriage certificate on a Tuesday morning in March, and she was not looking for it. She was looking for the car insurance renewal document that her husband Nathan had told her was in the third drawer of the filing cabinet in his home office, and she was standing in that home office in her bathrobe with her coffee going cold on the desk, beside her pulling folders out of the third drawer one at a time, when she felt the weight of a manila envelope that was heavier than it should have been for a car insurance document, and she opened it, and inside was a marriage certificate issued by Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, dated 14 months ago, and the name on the left side of that certificate was her husband's name, and the name on the right side of that certificate was her sister's name, and Renee Holloway stood in her husband's home office in Charlotte, North Carolina on a Tuesday morning in March and read both names twice, and then a third time, and then she set the certificate down on the desk beside her cold coffee, and she stood very still for a long time, and in that stillness, she understood something that she had been circling for the better part of 2 years without being willing to land on it directly. And what she understood was not simply that her husband had done something unforgivable and that her sister had done something equally unforgivable. What she understood in that specific stillness was that she had known, not the specifics, not the certificate, not the county courthouse and the fraudulent filing, but the shape of what was happening. She had known the shape of it for longer than she was comfortable acknowledging, and she had chosen not to look directly at the shape, because looking directly at it would have required her to act, and she had not yet been ready to act. She was ready now. She made 3 decisions standing at that desk with her cold coffee beside her. The first decision was that she was not going to cry. The second decision was that she was not going to say anything yet, and the third decision was that she was going to find out exactly how long this had been happening, and exactly what had been done, and exactly what she was actually dealing with before she moved a single inch in any direction. She placed the certificate back inside the manila envelope. She placed the manila envelope back inside the third drawer exactly where she had found it. She picked up her cold coffee. She walked back to her kitchen, and she sat down at her kitchen table, and she began to think. Stay with me, because what Renee Holloway did over the next 30 days before her husband and her sister understood that she knew anything at all is one of the most precise and deliberate responses to betrayal we have ever documented on this channel. And the ending of this story is not the ending that Nathan saw coming. It was not the ending that her sister Diane saw coming. It was not even the ending that the people closest to Renee saw coming. Because Renee Holloway had spent 11 years married to a man who believed he was the smartest person in any room he entered, and she had spent 11 years allowing him to believe that. And what he had never understood in all that time was that the woman who never argued, who never pushed back, who always seemed to defer to his judgment and his decisions and his version of events, had been paying attention to every single thing he did and every single thing he said for 11 years, and had understood all of it completely, and had simply chosen, until this particular Tuesday morning in March, not to use what she knew. Subscribe to Psyche Tales TV right now if you have not already, because we tell the stories on this channel that nobody else is telling, and this community is growing every single day. Drop your location in the comments right now and tell us. If you found what Renee found in that filing cabinet drawer, what would your first move be? We read every single comment, and we want to hear from you before this story is over. Charlotte, North Carolina, 2011. Renee Holloway was 32 years old when she married Nathan Holloway at a Baptist church in the Dilworth neighborhood on the south side of the city on a warm September afternoon when the trees along the street outside the church were just beginning to turn and the light coming through the stained glass windows was the specific amber of early autumn in the Carolina Piedmont, and every person in that room believed they were watching a marriage that was going to last, because the two people at the altar looked like people who had made a decision rather than people who had been swept into one. Renee was a financial analyst at a mid-sized Charlotte investment firm, and she had the specific kind of intelligence that does not announce itself because it does not need to. She was not the loudest person in any room she entered. She was not the person who corrected you when you were wrong in front of other people. She was the person who noticed everything and remembered everything and processed everything and said very little about any of it unless the situation specifically required her to speak. Her colleagues at the investment firm called her the closer, because when a situation was complicated and nobody could figure out what was actually happening beneath the surface, Renee was the person they sent in. Not because she was aggressive or confrontational, but because she had the specific gift of making people feel completely comfortable while she was taking their entire situation apart with surgical precision and putting it back together in a way that made the truth visible. Her mother, Gloria, a retired Charlotte schoolteacher who had raised Renee and her younger sister Diane in a modest house in the Villa Heights neighborhood northeast of Uptown, had always said that Renee was the still water that ran the deepest, and that the people who mistook her quietness for emptiness were making the most expensive mistake available to them. Nathan Holloway had made that mistake on their second date and had never fully corrected it in 11 years of marriage. He had looked at a quiet, composed woman and had seen someone who would not require him to be accountable in ways that made him uncomfortable, and he had been right about that for a very long time, and then he had been catastrophically wrong about it on a Tuesday morning in March. Nathan Holloway was 35 when they married, a commercial real estate broker in Charlotte who had built a solid reputation over a decade of work in a city that was growing fast enough that capable real estate brokers could build significant businesses without being exceptional, just capable and present and willing to work the hours. And he had the specific kind of confidence that comes from having been the most capable person in most of the rooms he had been in for most of his adult life. He was charming and deliberate and possessed of the particular quality of making everyone in his vicinity feel like the most important person present, which is a quality that serves a commercial real estate broker extremely well and serves a husband considerably less well, because it is not a quality that turns itself off at home. Nathan applied it to everyone: clients, colleagues, friends, and eventually to a woman who was not his wife. Renee had noticed the quality from the beginning and had made a private assessment of it early in their relationship that she had never shared with Nathan directly. She had noticed that his charm was a tool he used rather than a character trait he possessed, and she had decided that this was manageable as long as the tool was deployed within appropriate boundaries, and she had spent 11 years watching those boundaries with the same careful attention she applied to everything. For 9 of those 11 years, the boundaries held in the ways that mattered, and for 2 of those 11 years they did not, and Renee watched the erosion happening with the specific clarity of someone who has developed very good pattern recognition and was waiting to understand the full pattern before she named it. Diane Patterson, who by the time Renee found the certificate was calling herself Diane Holloway in Gaston County, which was the county adjacent to Mecklenburg where she appeared to have established a separate residence for purposes that became clearer the deeper Renee looked, was 30 years old at the time the marriage certificate was issued, 2 years younger than Renee, and had spent most of her adult life in the specific orbit of her older sister without ever fully acknowledging to herself how much of what she wanted was shaped by what Renee already had. She was not a malicious person in the conventional sense of that word. She was a person who had made a series of decisions that she had wrapped in enough self-justifying language that by the time she was standing in a Mecklenburg County courthouse signing a marriage certificate with her sister's husband, she had convinced herself that what she was doing was simply following something real rather than taking something that belonged to someone else. This is the specific self-deception that makes this kind of betrayal possible, not the dramatic villainy of someone who has decided to destroy a person they love, but the quieter, and in some ways more damaging self-deception of someone who has decided that their own feelings are sufficient justification for whatever they need to do to act on them. Diane had been close to Nathan for years in a way that Renee had noticed and filed away. She came to family dinners and lingered. After Renee went to bed, she called Nathan directly for things that did not require him specifically. She had opinions about Nathan's business decisions that she shared with a familiarity that suggested access to information that moved between them outside of Renee's presence. Renee had noticed all of it and had said nothing because saying something without being certain was not how Renee operated, and because the picture was not yet complete enough to act on until the third drawer completed it. Renee and Nathan had been having problems for approximately 2 years before the Tuesday morning in March. Not dramatic problems. Not the kind that produced slammed doors and shouted accusations, the quieter, more corrosive kind. The kind where 2 people who once knew exactly how to be in the same room together have gradually stopped knowing and have replaced that knowledge with a careful performed normalcy that neither of them fully believes, but both of them maintain, because maintaining it is easier than the alternative. Nathan had become distant in a specific and recognizable way. He worked later than he used to. He traveled more than his business calendar seemed to require when Renee reviewed it with the attention to detail she applied to everything. He was present in their Charlotte home without being present in the way that actually mattered. and he had developed the specific quality of someone who is managing a secret, a certain carefulness around his phone, a certain quickness to offer explanations for his time that Renee had not asked for. There was also the matter of the money, not dramatic amounts, not the kind of transfer that would trigger an immediate alert on a joint account, but a pattern that Renee had noticed 3 months before the Tuesday in March and had filed away in the same part of her mind where she filed everything she was not yet ready to act on. Small, consistent transfers to an account she did not recognize, regular enough to suggest intention rather than error, timed in a way that suggested planning rather than impulse. She had known about the money pattern for 3 months before she found the certificate, and the certificate gave the money pattern its explanation, and the money pattern gave the certificate its full significance, and together they completed a picture that was now so clear and so specific that Renee could see every corner of it without straining. And Renee had been watching all of this and building the picture, and the picture had been almost complete for months before the Tuesday morning in March. The third drawer did not reveal something entirely new to her. It gave her the specific piece that made everything else make complete and actionable sense. The marriage certificate told her the what and the when 14 months ago, which meant that whatever had been happening between Nathan and Diane had progressed to a legal ceremony in a Mecklenburg County courthouse, while Renee and Nathan were still living together in their Charlotte home, and while Diane was still coming to family dinners and calling Renee on Sunday afternoons and asking about her week with the specific performed warmth of someone who has decided that what their sister does not know cannot hurt her. What the certificate did not tell Renee was the full legal picture, and she understood immediately that she needed the full legal picture before she moved. She understood that a second marriage while legally married to a first spouse was not valid in North Carolina regardless of what any certificate said. Bigamy was both a civil matter and a criminal matter in this state. And what this meant practically was that while the certificate Nathan and Diane had signed had the appearance of legal standing, it had none in actual fact. What it did have was evidentiary value of a significant kind. She called a Charlotte family law attorney named Patricia Owens that same Tuesday afternoon. Patricia was 54 years old and had spent 25 years in Mecklenburg County family court, and was precisely the kind of attorney you called when the situation was complicated and the stakes were real, and you needed someone who would think clearly rather than react emotionally. Renee told Patricia what she had found, and Patricia was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I need you to come in tomorrow morning, and I need you to bring everything you can gather without alerting him that you are gathering it." Renee said she would be there at 8. She did not tell Nathan she had found anything that evening. She made dinner the way she always made dinner. She sat across from her husband at their kitchen table, and she listened to him talk about a commercial property deal he was working on in the South End neighborhood, and she asked appropriate questions at appropriate moments, and she was present and warm and exactly the wife he believed her to be. And Nathan Holloway sat across the table from his wife of 11 years on the evening of the day she had found the certificate and felt, as he often did at that table, completely comfortable. He had no idea that the woman across the table from him had spent the afternoon on the phone with one of the most experienced family law attorneys in Mecklenburg County and had already begun, with the same quiet surgical precision she applied to everything, to take his situation completely apart. Patricia Owens explained the full legal picture the next morning and confirmed everything Renee had already understood. The Mecklenburg County certificate was a fraudulent filing. It had the appearance of a legal document, but had no legal standing because Nathan was already legally married to Renee, and the foundational requirement for a valid marriage license had not been met. Diane was not legally Nathan's wife regardless of what that certificate said or what either of them believed. Nathan had committed bigamy, which was a Class 1 felony in North Carolina, and the fraudulent nature of the filing gave Renee's legal position in the divorce proceedings a significant additional dimension that her attorney could deploy in ways that a straightforward adultery case would not have provided. Patricia also told Renee that the most important strategic priority right now was to understand the full financial picture of the marriage before Nathan understood that Renee knew anything at all. She said, "The moment he knows you found it, he will start moving things. We need to know what there is to move before he gets that chance." Renee said she understood completely. She went home, and she spent the next 4 days pulling every financial record she could access. And as a financial analyst with 11 years of access to every joint account and every household financial document, this was not a small amount of material. She pulled bank statements going back 3 years. she pulled investment account records. She pulled property records for both their jointly held assets and anything she could find in Nathan's name alone. She pulled his business financial disclosures from the previous 2 years. She cross-referenced the pattern of transfers she had noticed 3 months earlier with the full account history and confirmed what she had suspected: 8 months of consistent transfers to a separate account. Not individually large enough to trigger attention, but cumulatively substantial. The kind of pattern that a financial analyst recognizes immediately because she has been trained to find exactly this kind of pattern in other people's situations and had now found it in her own. She brought everything to Patricia on the 5th day, and Patricia looked at what Renee had assembled and said, "You are very good at this." And Renee said, "I know." And Patricia said, "Then let us use it." Before we go any further, we want to hear from you. Drop your city in the comments right now and tell us. Could you have sat across that dinner table from your husband every night for 30 days knowing what Renee knew and said absolutely nothing? We read every comment, and we genuinely want to know. And if you are not subscribed yet, please subscribe right now, because stories like this one are coming out on this channel regularly, and you do not want to find out about them 3 weeks late. Patricia Owens filed the paperwork on a Friday morning 30 days after the Tuesday in March. Not divorce paperwork yet. Not criminal complaint paperwork yet. Something more precise and more immediately effective. An emergency financial restraining order that froze every joint account and every marital asset the moment it was served. The order was served to Nathan Holloway at his commercial real estate office in the South End neighborhood of Charlotte at 2:15 on a Friday afternoon by a process server who handed him the documents with the professional neutrality of someone who has done this many times and registers nothing particular about any individual instance of it. Nathan looked at the documents, and his face went through several expressions in a short period of time. The first was confusion, the second was understanding, and the third was the specific expression of a man who has just understood that the situation he believed he was managing has not been what he believed. It was for a period of time he cannot yet calculate. He called Renee immediately, and Renee answered on the second ring, and Nathan said, "What is this?" And Renee said, "It is exactly what it says it is, Nathan." And Nathan said, "We need to talk about this." And Renee said, "I agree." And Nathan said, "Tonight at home." And Renee said, "No. My attorney's office Monday morning, 9 o'clock. Bring yours." And she ended the call. She sat in the parking garage of her office building for about 20 minutes after that call with her phone in her lap and her hands completely still. And she felt for the first time since the Tuesday morning in March something that was not the cold, focused clarity of someone executing a plan, but something warmer and more complicated than that. Something that was grief and relief arriving in the same moment at the same address. Grief for the 11 years and the marriage and the version of Nathan she had believed in before the third drawer showed her the version that had been operating underneath the one she knew, and relief that the picture was now complete, and that she was no longer standing inside something without being able to see its full shape. She picked up her phone and she called her mother, Gloria, and she said, "Mama, I need to tell you something." And Gloria said, "I know, baby. I have been waiting for you to call." And Renee said, "How long have you been waiting?" And Gloria said, "Longer than I should have stayed quiet. And I am sorry I did not say it sooner." And Renee said, "You could not have said it sooner because I was not ready to hear it sooner." And that was the truth of it, and both of them knew it. Diane called Renee 4 times between the Friday afternoon the restraining order was served and the Monday morning meeting. Renee did not answer any of the 4 calls. On the 4th call, Diane left a voicemail that Renee has described as the most elaborate performance of remorse she has ever heard from someone who had not yet fully accepted that they had done something requiring genuine remorse rather than strategic explanation. Diane said she was sorry and then spent the majority of the voicemail describing the circumstances that had produced the situation in a way that was designed to make those circumstances feel extenuating. She talked about what she had felt, and when she had first felt it, and how long she had tried to resist it, and how it had eventually become something she could not continue to resist, and how she had never intended for any of this to hurt Renee, and how she hoped that someday Renee would be able to understand that some things happen between people that neither person fully chooses. Renee listened to the voicemail once completely and without interruption, and then she set her phone down, and she did not call back. She has told me that what she felt listening to that voicemail was not the anger she might have expected. She had moved through anger in the first 48 hours after the Tuesday in March, and had come out the other side of it into something cooler and more permanent. What she felt listening to her sister explain herself was the specific and quiet sadness of recognizing that the person explaining themselves does not yet understand that the explanation is not the part that matters. The part that matters is the thing that was done, and no explanation of the feelings that produced it changes the shape of the thing itself. Renee's mother Gloria drove from Villa Heights to Renee's Charlotte home on the Saturday after the restraining order was served and sat at the kitchen table where Renee had sat on the Tuesday morning in March, and the two women talked for 6 hours, and Gloria told her daughter that she had known something was wrong between Nathan and Diane for longer than she had been willing to say out loud, because saying it out loud would have made it real, and she had not wanted it to be real, and she was sorry she had stayed quiet. And Renee told her mother that she could not have said it sooner, because Renee herself had not been ready to hear it sooner, and that was not anyone's fault except the two people who had built the thing that everyone else was carefully not looking at directly. Gloria asked Renee what she needed, and Renee said she needed her mother to sit at that table with her for a little while longer, and Gloria stayed until 10 o'clock that evening, and they did not talk about Nathan or Diane for most of those hours. They talked about Gloria's garden and about Renee's work and about a restaurant in Plaza Midwood that Renee had been meaning to try for months, and that was what Renee needed. Not to continue analyzing what had happened, but to remember that what had happened was not the entirety of who she was or the entirety of what her life contained. The Monday morning meeting at Patricia Owen's office lasted 3 hours. Nathan's attorney, Gerald Moore, a Charlotte family law specialist who had built his reputation on high-asset divorce cases, had advised his client before they walked in that the bigamy filing fundamentally changed the nature of the proceedings, and that contesting them with the documentation Renee had already assembled over 30 days was not a position he could recommend with any professional confidence. Nathan sat across a conference room table from his wife of 11 years, and the attorney she had retained 30 days before he knew she had found anything, and he understood in that room, with a completeness he had not experienced before, that the woman he had spent 11 years underestimating had not been failing to notice what he was doing. She had been watching what he was doing and building the case, and waiting until the case was complete before she used it. His attorney spoke, and Patricia spoke, and documents were reviewed and positions were stated, and through all of it Renee sat at that conference table with the same composed attention she had been applying to everything since the Tuesday in March, and said very little, because she did not need to say very much. The document said what needed to be said, and Patricia added what needed to be added, and Nathan had very little to contribute to any of it. That was not a form of concession. At one point, Gerald Moore asked for a brief recess, and the two attorneys stepped out, and Nathan and Renee sat alone in the conference room for the first time since the Tuesday morning in March, and Nathan looked at his wife and said, "How long did you know?" And Renee looked at her husband of 11 years and said, "Long enough," and that was the only private conversation they had in that room, and it was sufficient. The divorce settlement was reached in private mediation in June. For months after the Tuesday morning in March, the financial restraining order had prevented Nathan from moving any additional assets. After the Friday afternoon, the process server handed him the documents, and the transfers he had made in the preceding 8 months were traced and included in the marital estate calculation. What Renee received in the settlement reflected the full picture of what they had built together over 11 years rather than the diminished version Nathan had been quietly and carefully arranging for her to receive. The bigamy matter was referred to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office, and Nathan ultimately entered a plea agreement that resulted in a suspended sentence and a fine that was substantial enough to matter to someone who had been quietly moving money for 8 months, and a permanent record that attached itself to his professional real estate licensing in ways that his career in Charlotte did not fully recover from. The commercial real estate business survived, but its reputation in the Charlotte market, where professional licensing and professional standing are the foundational currency of the work, took a damage that compounded over the years following in ways that Nathan had not calculated when he was making the decisions that produced it. Diane moved to Raleigh 3 months after the restraining order was served. She and Renee have not spoken since the voicemail. Gloria speaks to Diane occasionally and has told Renee that Diane is doing what people do when they have done something they cannot undo, which is to build a life somewhere else and to try not to look directly at what they left behind. Renee has told her mother that she wishes Diane well in the specific way of someone who has decided to spend their energy on themselves rather than on what someone else did, and that she does not need Diane to suffer in order for herself to be fine. That distinction is important to Renee, and she has stated it clearly more than once. She does not want Diane to be destroyed by what she did. She simply does not want to be in the same room with her, or on the same phone call with her, or in any proximity to the version of events that Diane will continue to construct around what happened, because Renee has seen enough of how Diane constructs versions of events to know that the construction will continue indefinitely, and that nothing about it will resemble what actually occurred. Renee Holloway is 44 years old now, and she lives in a condominium in the Plaza Midwood neighborhood of Charlotte that she chose entirely by herself with the same careful attention she applies to everything. She went to that restaurant she had been meaning to try, and she has been back several times since, and she has told me that the first time she sat down at a table there alone with a glass of wine and a menu and no one to consult about what to order was one of the clearest moments of her life. Not because it was dramatic or because it represented something she needed to announce to anyone, but because it was simply a Tuesday evening and she was in a restaurant she had chosen and she was about to eat food she was going to select entirely according to her own preference, and the specific quiet pleasure of that ordinary freedom was something she had not fully understood she had been missing until she was sitting in it. She is still a financial analyst at the same Charlotte investment firm, and she is better at her work than she was before the Tuesday morning in March, because the 30 days between finding the certificate and serving the restraining order taught her something about her own capabilities that she had been applying professionally for years without fully understanding personally. She learned that the intelligence and precision and patience she brought to other people's complicated financial situations was always available to be applied to her own life, and that the reason she had not applied it to her own situation sooner was not because she lacked the capability, but because applying it required her to look directly at something she was not yet ready to see. And she has said that the most important thing she did in those 30 days was not hire the attorney, and it was not pull the financial records, and it was not serve the restraining order. The most important thing she did was put the certificate back in the envelope and the envelope back in the drawer and pick up her cold coffee and walk back to her kitchen and sit down and think. Because that decision, the decision to wait until she was ready and not a moment sooner, was the decision that made everything else possible. Here is what stays with me about Renee Holloway. Nathan Holloway spent 11 years in a marriage with a financial analyst who had the professional training and the intellectual capability to document and trace every financial decision he made, and he spent those 11 years believing that her quietness meant she was not paying close attention. He was wrong in the specific way that people are wrong when they confuse the absence of visible reaction with the absence of awareness. Renee was always paying attention. She had simply been deciding every single day for 11 years whether what she was observing required her to act. On the Tuesday morning in March, it required her to act, and she acted with a precision and a thoroughness that left Nathan Holloway very little room to maneuver in any direction. But here is the part of this story that I think matters most. Renee did not win because she was smarter than Nathan in some abstract sense. She won because she knew herself clearly enough to understand that the most powerful thing she could do in that moment was to put the envelope back in the drawer and sit down at her kitchen table and think before she moved a single inch. Most people in that situation would have called someone, would have confronted him that evening, would have let the shock and the grief and the anger determine the timing, and all of those things would have given Nathan an advantage he did not deserve to have. Renee gave him nothing. She gave him 30 more days of believing he was managing his situation while she was taking it apart from the inside. And the gap between what he believed was happening and what was actually happening in those 30 days was the gap that determined everything that came after. So here's what I want to ask you before you go. The first question is about those 30 days. Renee knew what she knew, and she sat across from Nathan at that kitchen table every evening and made dinner and asked about his work and said nothing. Do you think you could have done what she did? Do you think you could have held that knowledge for 30 days without saying a single word while you built the complete picture? And the second question is about Diane. Her sister sent a voicemail full of explanation rather than a simple apology, and Renee listened to it once and never responded. Do you think Renee made the right decision not to respond to her sister at all? Or do you think there was a conversation that needed to happen between those two women that Renee chose not to have? Drop your answers in the comments because I genuinely want to know what you think, and this story is going to start a conversation down there that is going to run for a very long time. If this story made you think about the quiet people in your life who you may have been underestimating in any way, tell them you see them. Hit the like button if Renee Holloway reminded you of someone you know, and subscribe to Psyche Tales TV because we are telling the stories that matter on this channel, and this community is growing every single day, and we are grateful for every single one of you who is here with us. Take care of yourself. I will see you in the next one.